Hi, I'm Paul.
And I'm Ming.
And welcome to Skip the Rulebook, your rulebook brokers on the stock market of your new game.
Today we'll be getting rich quick in Ponzi Scheme. In this game you'll need flexible morals as you become financial frauds attempting to part your eager investors from their hard-earned cash. As your scheme grows you'll need to bring in new investors to pay off the old before the whole thing comes crashing down.
Well, at least if you go bankrupt you can always run for president. Let's skip the rulebook. I'm not going to need this. The first thing you'll be presented with is the funding board. This is your market during the game and the means by which you acquire new investors to your bogus industries. Next, you've got the player screens. A good portion of Ponzi Scheme involves dodgy deals and secret trades. The player screens will allow you to hide your cash lest another player try and take you to the cleaners.
The fund cards represent the gullible masses flocking to your latest get-rich-quick scheme. While they do issue you with the cash needed for your next clandestine trade, they come at a price as you need to pay back dividends after a period of time. The industry tiles are the front for your oh-so-legitimate business. Each time you hook a new investor, you also gain a new industry. The trick is holding on to them once your coffers begin to run dry.
Ponzi Scheme revolves around your ability to acquire just enough new investors to pay off the old ones when the dividends come due. The time wheel and the time marker cards allow you to keep track of how long you've got before you've got to cough up the cash. No game of money making would be complete without some paper cash, especially one in which your entire enterprise depends on every last dollar. One of the most interesting mechanics in Ponzi Scheme comes from the use of this simple leather pouch. Mine's out of the gutter, please. Players will engage in secret trading in order to buy and sell industries. This pouch acts as a way to secretly pass money to your potential trading partners without the worry of prying eyes.
Finally, we have the starting player token and the luxury tokens. The luxury tokens are only used in the advanced version of the game and are an alternative method to gaining those all-important winning points.
Ponzi Scheme can be played with anywhere between 3 and 5 players, so tonight we're joined by Hazel. Start by placing the funding board in the centre of the play area. Next, take the fund cards and separate out the 9 starting cards. These are identified by a large blue dollar sign in the bottom left. Arrange these on the board so that the lowest 3 values are on the first row and the highest 3 values are on the third row. The order of the cards on each row doesn't matter. Shuffle the remaining fund cards and then place them next to the board. This will be referred to as the funding deck.
Next, place the insta-tiles into piles of each of the 4 types and place them next to the funding board. Then, separate out the cash by denomination and place them near the player board in reach of all players. This will form the bank.
Each player is issued with a time wheel and a time marker. Place the time wheel next to you, leaving space around it as we'll be placing cards there later. Place the time marker next to the red arrow so we can keep track of where the wheel started. Each player also gets a player screen. Players can hide cash behind their screens, but all other materials must be kept public. Sadly, we have nothing to stash behind it now.
The last thing we need to do is determine the starting player and pass them the starting player token. This should be the player who's best at keeping their word.
Pick me!
We're now ready to begin. The aim of Ponzi Scheme is twofold. At the end of the game, the player with the most points wins. Points can be gained by either owning industries or having cash on hand. The twist is that the game continues until one player goes bankrupt and can't pay their debts. It can potentially happen to more than one player in the same turn. Any player who goes bankrupt automatically loses. The game is played over several rounds, with each round broken into a number of phases. The first phase of each round is the funding phase. Each player in turn may choose one industry in which they would like to invest. There are 4 of these to choose from, but they are, for all intents and purposes, the same. You should place each of your industry tiles in front of you in columns of the same type, so that other players can easily identify the type and number of each industry that you own. Next, I choose a fund card from the board. The row that you choose your fund card from must correspond to the number of tiles of your chosen type. Since this is the first industry tile that I have of the grain industry, I can only choose from the first row. There are 3 numbers of importance on the fund cards. The first larger number on the right hand side indicates how much money I will gain from the bank for taking this investment. In this case, I gain $9. Thank you. Hide any money you gain behind your player screen. The next number in the small hex tells me how much time I've got before I'll need to pay back this investment. I will then need to place this card next to the time wheel adjacent to the same number. Since this fund card has a 5 in the hex, I'll need to place it next to the number 5. The final number is the interest. This tells me how much money I'll have to pay back later in the game when it comes time to reward my investors.
Whenever there are less than 9 fund cards on the board, you should draw a new card to restock the market. You should then rearrange the cards on the board so that the 3 lowest numbers are on the first row and the 3 highest are on the bottom. I can then take my turn. I'll start by drawing a real estate industry and this fund card, which will give me 11 cash. Thank you. I then place this next to the number 5.
I'll also take a real estate industry and the number 10, which gives me $10. Thank you. And is also placed next to the number wheel, next to the number 5.
With the funding phase over, we now move on to clandestine trading. In this phase, each player, in player order, gets the opportunity to buy industries from each other. You can always opt to pass. In order to trade, 2 players must have at least one of the same industry. Since I'm currently the only player with grain, that means I cannot trade, so play passes to Ming.
Both Hazel and I have opted for real estate, so we can trade. I start by indicating the industry I'm trying to buy and the player I wish to trade with. I then decide how much I think it is worth and place this amount of money secretly into the trading envelope. I then pass this envelope to Hazel.
Once a player has handed you the wallet, you have a choice to make. You can either accept the offer and sell your industry, or you can choose to counter offer. If you accept the offer, as I will now, you then take the money and secretly place it with yours behind the screen. The other player then takes your industry and place it in front of them, stacking it with their existing industry. If I had chosen to counteroffer, I would have had the chance to reverse the deal and buy Ming's industry instead. To counteroffer, you simply place cash into the wallet equal to the amount that you were offered, then pass the wallet back. You then take the named industry from that player. It's important to note that you cannot refuse to take part in the trade. You only have the options of accepting the trade or making a counteroffer. With Ming's trade complete, I would now get the chance to initiate a trade of my own, but as I have no industries to trade, I can't.
With funding and trading over, we can now wrap up the turn. I start by passing the starting player marker clockwise. The new player now chooses one card from the funding board to discard. Next, we check for any potential market crashes. These are caused by bears in the market, such as this one. If there are a number of bears equal to or greater than the number of players, the market crashes. As there are currently less than 3 bears, we can skip this phase for now. Next, we turn our time wheels clockwise by 1 space. Finally, we pay our interest. If your red arrow is pointing towards any of your fund cards, you must pay an amount equal to the interest to the bank. Once you've paid off a card, you must then change its position. Pick up the card and place it next to the time wheel adjacent to the number indicated by the hex, in exactly the same way as you did when you first picked it up. Luckily, we have a few more turns before our interest comes due. With the interest phase over, we can then begin the next round.
After the first turn, choosing your fund card becomes a little more tactical. You may only choose a card from a row that matches the number of your chosen industry tile. I currently have 2 real estate tiles. If I choose to take another red real estate tile, I must choose a card from the 3rd row, as I now have 3 industry tiles of that type. Thank you. I could have opted to instead start a new industry, such as transportation. If I'd done this, I would have had to choose from the 1st row, as that would have been my first industry of that type. If you already have 3 or more of a given industry, you may not draw any more of that type during the funding phase. As before, I replenish the market, and play now passes to the next player.
I'll take grain and 15. Thank you.
And I shall have real estate. And this one. Thank you.
With funding done, we move again to trading. While you can only gain up to 3 of the same industry tile type during the funding phase, you can gain more than that during clandestine trading. So this turn, I will aim to buy a 4th real estate tile from Paul.
Yeah, I think not. And I'll take that.
If during trading you find that people are always countering your offer, you may want to try increasing the amount of money you put inside the wallet.
No trades for me this turn.
Or meet up.
With trading complete, I pass the starting player marker clockwise, and Hazel removes a card from the board.
Again, check to see if there is a market crash. This time we have 3 bad cards, and since there are only 3 players, the market will crash. When this happens, we remove all the bad cards from the market and draw new cards to replenish it. When we now come to move our time wheel around, we move it 2 spaces instead of 1. Sadly, this does not mean that you can skip the repayment of any of your investments. If your wheel would pass over an investment during the second move, you move the funding card as well as the wheel. This can mean that you end up paying more than you thought if your cards stack up.
Finally, check to see if you have any investments to pay before ending the turn. The game ends immediately if any players cannot afford to pay back their investments and they're declared bankrupt. Any players who go bankrupt are considered to have lost the game. All remaining players should now tally up their points to determine the winner. Start by counting up your industries separately by type and then consult the points table to determine your score. For instance, I have 1 grain industry giving me 1 point. I have 2 real estate industries giving me 3 points, which means I have a total of 4 points for industry. You must then count up the amount of cash you have on hand. And again consult the points table to determine how much you score. You then add together your points for industry and cash to work out your total score. The highest wins. Once you've played a couple of rounds, you'll be wheeling and dealing with the best of them. Once you're confident, you do have the option of including the luxury tiles in the game to make surfing the crest of success or bankruptcy all the more perilous. Luxuries can be purchased during clandestine trading instead of trading with another player. To do so, pay the cost listed on the tile and then place it in front of you. At the end of the game during the scoring phase, players no longer gain points for cash on hand, and instead only gain points for industries and luxuries. The points value of each luxury is listed on the tile.
The most difficult aspect of the game is making sure you're holding onto enough money to safeguard against future repayments, particularly if the market crashes. This can be tricky if new to the game, even for the most savvy among you. To help you decide between similar fund cards, they do carry on them a percentage interest rate. This will give you an idea of the relative risk associated with that fund. In general though, the more money you gain, the more money you must pay.
That's it from us at Skip the Rulebook. If you found this video useful, please hit like. If you want to hear more from Skip the Rulebook, press subscribe. You can also find out more about us on Facebook, Twitter and skiptherulebook.com.
Join us next time for your chance to jump into that brand new board game without having to do any tedious rule reading.
See you later.